Daniel sat on the edge of the couch, his eyes fixed on the clock. 8:15 p.m. He could hear Emma's heels tapping on the floor upstairs as she moved around, getting ready. Her perfume wafted through the house, a scent he knew she only used on special occasions. "Going somewhere tonight?" Daniel asked casually as Emma walked down the stairs. She looked stunning, too stunning for a casual evening. Her black dress hugged her figure, and her makeup was flawless. Emma smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Just a small party with the girls. Nothing major." Daniel leaned back, his face calm. "At this hour?" Emma adjusted her bracelet and avoided his gaze. "Yeah, Lisa called last minute. I need this, Daniel. You know how stressful work has been lately." Daniel nodded, giving her nothing but a small, knowing smile. Inside, his mind raced. This wasn't the first time she'd used girls' night as an excuse. A week ago, he had noticed unfamiliar names in her phone, late-night messages she quickly deleted, and receipts from places she had no reason to visit. "Have fun," Daniel said, his voice steady and cold as he watched her grab her bag. Emma hesitated briefly at the door, as if checking herself in her reflection before leaving. The moment she shut the door, Daniel's smile vanished. He stood up and walked to the window, watching as Emma climbed into an unfamiliar black car waiting outside. His suspicion had turned into something deeper now, certainty. "Lisa doesn't drive a Mercedes," he muttered to himself. Daniel grabbed his jacket and his keys, sliding his phone into his pocket. If Emma thought he'd sit at home clueless while she played him for a fool, she was dead wrong. Keeping a safe distance, Daniel tailed the car. The night was dark, the streets unusually empty, which made it easier for him to follow without being noticed. Emma's car didn't head toward the restaurant district or Lisa's place. It took a turn toward the edge of the city, toward a small, upscale hotel. Daniel clenched the steering wheel, his jaw tight. "A party with the girls, huh?" The car pulled into the hotel parking lot. Emma stepped out, her heels clicking against the pavement. She stood there for a moment, looking around nervously, before a man walked up to her. Tall, confident, and dressed like he was someone important. He wrapped an arm around her waist and they walked inside together, laughing as though they hadn't a care in the world. Daniel's heart pounded, but his face remained stone cold. There was no shouting, no screaming, no dramatic outburst. He wasn't that kind of man. He watched them disappear through the hotel doors, then reached for his phone. He snapped a picture of the two of them walking together, the hotel sign glowing in the background. Proof. "She thinks she's won," Daniel whispered to himself, slipping his phone back into his pocket. "But she has no idea what's coming." As he sat there, staring at the hotel, a plan began to form. Daniel wasn't going to confront her yet. He was going to make sure that when he struck, she would regret every second of the lies she had told. Daniel returned home that night, his mind sharp and focused. The image of Emma walking into that hotel with another man replayed in his head like a broken record, but he refused to let his emotions take over. He wasn't going to lose control. This wasn't about yelling or crying. This was about revenge. A revenge so calculated that Emma would never forget it. He placed his phone on the desk, staring at the picture he had taken. The evidence was crystal clear. Her smile, the man's arm around her waist, and the hotel sign glowing in the background. "One mistake, Emma," Daniel whispered. "That's all I needed." The next morning, Daniel's routine was no different. He sat at the dining table, sipping his coffee as Emma came down the stairs, wearing a robe and pretending as if nothing had happened. "Morning," she chirped, pouring herself a cup of coffee. "I got back late. You were already asleep." Daniel looked up from his paper, his face calm and unreadable. "Yeah, I was pretty tired," he replied casually, though inside he was boiling. He watched her closely as she sat down, scrolling through her phone, likely texting him. She's careful, Daniel thought, but not careful enough. That afternoon, while Emma was at work, Daniel began his investigation. He searched through her laptop first, but she had been smart. no incriminating emails or messages. However, people always left something behind, no matter how careful they were. He noticed her browser history had been cleared, except for one thing: a hotel booking confirmation for that very same hotel. His lips curled into a faint smile. "You slipped, Emma. I told you, one mistake." Next, Daniel planted a GPS tracker in Emma's car. It was small, discreet, and something she would never find. He also synced her phone notifications to his laptop, a trick he had learned from a colleague in cybersecurity. Now, every text she received, every location she visited, would be known to him in real time. Later that evening, Emma sat across from him at dinner, laughing at a story she had made up about her day. She didn't know that Daniel's phone, lying face down on the table, had just pinged with a message from Paul. "Paul, tomorrow night, same place. Can't wait to see you." Daniel looked up, his expression calm and collected, masking the storm raging inside him. "That's funny," Daniel said softly, staring at her. "You always seem to be in such a good mood these days." Emma blinked, caught off guard. "What do you mean?" "Nothing," he replied, taking a sip of his water. "Just an observation." The next night, Daniel prepared himself. Emma dressed up again. Too much effort for dinner with Lisa. "You're going out again?" Daniel asked as she grabbed her bag. Emma smiled brightly. "Yeah, Lisa's going through some things. She needs me." Daniel nodded, smiling back. "Be careful out there." As soon as the door shut behind her, Daniel picked up his keys. This time, he didn't just follow her. He was ready. The GPS tracker led him to the same hotel. Daniel parked across the street, his hands steady as he waited. Emma's car was already there, and through the glass doors, he could see her meeting Paul in the lobby. They didn't even try to hide it this time. Laughing, touching, completely oblivious to the fact that Daniel was watching. Daniel's phone buzzed. It was the synced text notifications. "Paul, this weekend is going to be amazing. I booked the suite." Daniel smiled darkly. "Perfect. You just gave me everything I need." Daniel had everything he needed: proof, details, and the fire of betrayal burning in his chest. He wasn't going to explode in anger or let emotions ruin his strategy. No, he was going to make Emma and her lover regret every single choice they had made. That weekend, Daniel played his role perfectly. Calm, quiet, just as Emma expected him to be. She got ready again, her excitement hard to hide as she stood in front of the mirror. "Lisa again?" Daniel asked casually, sipping his coffee. "Yeah, girls' weekend trip. We'll be back late tomorrow," Emma said without hesitation. She grabbed her bag, her perfume lingering in the air as she headed for the door. Daniel smiled faintly as she left. This time there was no following. There was no need. Emma didn't know Daniel had already set the trap, one they wouldn't escape from. A few days earlier, Daniel had reached out to Paul's wife. Yes, Paul was married. The messages he uncovered showed that Paul had built his betrayal on the same lies he fed Emma. With careful planning, Daniel sent anonymous proof of Paul and Emma's affair to his wife. He knew it would unravel everything. Now, as Emma thought she was headed for a carefree weekend with her lover, the storm was already brewing. By the time she reached the hotel, Daniel's plan had already fallen into motion. Paul's wife showed up first, marching into the hotel lobby with fury written all over her face. She had the photos Daniel had sent her. Photos of Paul and Emma entering the hotel together, holding hands like carefree lovers. Emma and Paul were already in the suite upstairs when the chaos began. Paul's phone buzzed with a flurry of calls and messages from his wife, his face turning pale as he read through them. Paul didn't answer, but Emma could see panic setting in. Seconds later, the door to the suite swung open with a loud crash. Paul's wife barged in, shouting his name, her face twisted in rage. "What the hell is going on here?" she screamed. "Who is she?" Emma froze, her eyes wide in shock. "Who are you?" she stammered. "I'm his wife," the woman shot back, throwing photos onto the bed. "And you?" You're just another homewrecker. What's wrong? Emma asked, frowning. Paul tried to speak, but his wife wasn't done. You thought you could cheat on me, embarrass me, and I wouldn't find out. Look at this. She held up the proof Daniel had provided. Photos, texts, undeniable evidence. Emma turned to Paul, her voice shaking. You're married? You didn't tell me, and you're not innocent either. Paul's wife snapped at Emma. You're just as pathetic as he is. Meanwhile, Daniel sat at home, calm and collected, sipping whiskey as he watched the chaos unfold in real time. He had hacked into the hotel's security cameras days earlier, giving him a front-row seat to the confrontation. Emma's shocked face, Paul's wife shouting, Paul backing away like a coward. Every moment of their humiliation played out on his screen, exactly as Daniel had planned. Hours later, Emma returned home. She looked broken, her makeup smudged, her shoulders slumped. She found Daniel sitting in the living room, waiting. You're back early, he said, his tone neutral. Emma froze, her eyes searching his face. Daniel, I can explain. He stood up, his calmness more terrifying than any anger could have been. Don't bother, he said coldly. I already know. I've known for a while now. Her face went pale. What do you mean? Daniel pulled his phone from his pocket, holding up the photos, the messages, everything. Your lies, your weekend trips. Paul, I know it all, Emma. She covered her mouth, tears streaming down her face. How could you? How could I? Daniel stepped closer, his voice low but firm. How could you, Emma? I trusted you. I gave you everything, and you threw it all away for him. Emma collapsed onto the couch, sobbing. I'm sorry, Daniel. Please. I made a mistake. Daniel shook his head. A mistake? Number A mistake is forgetting an anniversary. What you did was a choice, one you made over and over again. He grabbed a folder from the table and dropped it beside her. These are divorce papers. I've already signed them. You can keep the lies, the betrayal, and the shame. You deserve them. Emma looked up at him, her face filled with regret, but Daniel was unmoved. Emma sat frozen on the couch, staring at the divorce papers Daniel had tossed in front of her. Her sobs echoed through the room, but Daniel didn't care anymore. He stood tall, calm and in control, completely unmoved by her tears. Please, Daniel, I can fix this. Just give me one chance, she stammered, her voice trembling. Daniel's lips curled into a faint, bitter smile. One chance? I gave you 1,000 chances, Emma. Every time you left late at night, every excuse you fed me, I let it slide, hoping I was wrong. But you weren't careful, were you? Emma tried to speak, but Daniel cut her off, his voice cold as ice. Save it. You don't get to rewrite the story now. It's too late. The next day, Daniel set his plan into full motion. He wasn't just ending their marriage, he was making sure Emma and her lover, Paul, faced the consequences of their actions. Daniel had friends in the right places, people who owed him favors. Paul wasn't just another man. He was a manager at a mid-sized firm, respected and trusted. Daniel sent an anonymous email to Paul's company, attaching photos and texts that proved the affair. Within hours, whispers began to spread around Paul's office. Colleagues stared at him in the hallways, shaking their heads. His boss called him in, holding printouts of the evidence. We have a reputation to uphold, the boss said firmly. You're suspended pending investigation. Paul's face drained of color. He knew this wasn't just about his job. It was about his reputation, his entire life crumbling around him. Meanwhile, Emma was beginning to feel the weight of her actions too. Daniel had made sure of it. He didn't stop at the divorce papers. He had sent the proof of her affair to her closest friends, her family, and even her parents. Her mother called her first. What have you done, Emma? Do you have any idea how ashamed we are? Emma's voice shook as she tried to explain, but her mother hung up, disgusted. Friends stopped replying to her messages. Her social circle, once vibrant and supportive, fell apart. Wherever she went, she felt the judgmental stares of those who knew her secret. At work, things weren't any better. Word had spread, and whispers followed her down the hallway. Her boss summoned her into his office. "Emma," he said coldly, "I don't need to explain how this reflects on us. You're a distraction. Take some time off, unpaid." Emma left the office that day, feeling as if the walls were closing in. The confident, carefree woman who once walked through life without consequence was now unrecognizable, lost, ashamed, and broken. That evening, Emma showed up at the house, knocking softly on the door. Daniel opened it, his expression unreadable. "Daniel, please," she whispered. "You don't have to do this. I can't lose everything." Daniel stared at her for a moment before replying, his voice firm and steady. "You lost everything the moment you chose him over me. This is your reality now, Emma. You brought this on yourself." Emma dropped to her knees on the porch, sobbing. "I made a mistake. I didn't think—" "That's the problem," Daniel interrupted sharply. "You didn't think. You didn't think about me, about the life we built, or about the consequences of your lies. And now, you'll live with them." Without another word, he stepped back and shut the door in her face. Inside, Daniel felt no guilt, no regret, only peace. He sat in his chair, looking through the window as Emma walked away, broken and alone. She had underestimated him, thought he would be weak, thought he wouldn't fight back. But Daniel had made sure she would never forget this betrayal. Days turned into weeks, and Emma's life spiraled further out of control. She moved into a small, dingy apartment on the outskirts of town, far from the comfort and luxury she once shared with Daniel. Her friends had turned their backs on her, her family wanted nothing to do with her, and Paul had vanished completely, leaving her to face the consequences alone. Daniel, on the other hand, was thriving. The house, once filled with Emma's lies, felt peaceful again. He spent his days focused on work and his nights surrounded by friends who supported him. He had taken back control of his life, and every step forward was another reminder that he had won. But there was one more thing Daniel needed to do. One evening, Daniel received a message. It was from Paul's wife. "Thank you for showing me the truth. I've filed for divorce and he's lost everything. I owe you." Daniel smiled faintly. Paul's life had crumbled, his marriage destroyed, his job lost, and his reputation ruined. The man who thought he could walk into Daniel's life and take what wasn't his now had nothing. Perfect, Daniel thought. But there's one final piece left. Emma's phone rang late that night. She sat alone at her small kitchen table, a half-empty glass of wine in front of her. When she saw Daniel's name, her hands shook. She hesitated, then answered. "Daniel?" "Meet me tomorrow," Daniel said. His voice was calm but firm. "You owe me that much." Emma's heart raced. "Where?" "You'll know when you get there," he replied before hanging up. The next day, Emma arrived at the cafe where Daniel had asked her to meet him. She looked worn down, her makeup barely hiding the exhaustion on her face. Daniel sat at a table near the window, calm and composed, sipping his coffee as she approached. She sat down slowly, avoiding his gaze. "Why did you ask me here?" Daniel looked at her, his expression unreadable. "I wanted to see you one last time. I wanted you to understand something." Emma fumbled for words. "Daniel, I know I messed up. I don't know what I was thinking. I ruined everything." Daniel leaned forward, his voice steady and deliberate. "You didn't just ruin everything, Emma. You ruined me, us. You betrayed someone who would have done anything for you, and you need to know that actions have consequences." Emma's eyes filled with tears. "I've already lost everything. My friends, my family. Paul is gone. Isn't that enough for you?" Daniel shook his head slowly. "Number. Because I'm not doing this for revenge anymore, Emma. I'm doing this so you remember what happens when you betray the one person who truly loved you. I want you to think about this moment every time you try to lie to yourself about what you did. Emma buried her face in her hands, sobbing. Daniel stood up, tossing a few bills on the table. This is the last time you'll ever see me. I'm done with you. As he turned to leave, he paused at the door. You chose him over me, Emma, but in the end, I won, and you lost everything. Outside, Daniel felt lighter than he had in months. The burden was gone, replaced by clarity and peace. He walked down the street with confidence, knowing he had reclaimed his dignity, his strength, and his life. Behind him, Emma sat in that cafe, alone and broken, a shell of the woman who once thought she could outsmart him. Weeks had turned into months, and the storm that once consumed Daniel's life had finally passed. The echoes of betrayal, the anger, and the humiliation had all faded, replaced by a quiet sense of triumph and peace. Daniel stood on the balcony of his home, looking out at the city lights as the evening breeze brushed past him. The house, once a prison filled with lies, was now his sanctuary. It was quiet, clean, and free of the shadows Emma had left behind. Daniel's phone buzzed. It was a message from an old college friend inviting him to a small gathering that weekend. He hadn't seen them in years, and for the first time in a long while, he felt like rejoining life. He went out that Saturday, laughing and reconnecting with friends who reminded him of who he used to be, a confident, ambitious, and strong man. No longer weighed down by the betrayal, Daniel was rebuilding himself piece by piece. You're looking better than ever, a friend remarked. Daniel grinned, holding his drink up. New beginnings, my friend. New beginnings. Meanwhile, Emma's life had become unrecognizable. Rumors of her affair still followed her wherever she went. She worked a low-paying job to scrape by, living alone in a small apartment with no one to turn to. Paul was long gone. He had moved to another city, leaving her to deal with the mess they created. On one particularly cold night, Emma sat in her apartment, scrolling through old photos of the life she once had. Pictures of her and Daniel on vacations, anniversaries, birthdays, all memories she had shattered. A tear slipped down her cheek as she realized what she had lost. This is all my fault, she whispered to herself, clutching the photo. But no one was listening. Back at his home, Daniel was thriving. He had started hitting the gym regularly, focusing on his health and rebuilding his confidence. His career had never been better, and he began exploring new passions, things he had put aside during his marriage. One afternoon, while sitting at a cafe, Daniel noticed a woman reading a book at a nearby table. She looked up and their eyes met briefly. She smiled softly before returning to her pages. For a moment, Daniel felt something he hadn't in a long time: hope. That evening, Daniel reflected on everything that had happened. The betrayal had hurt, no doubt, but it had also been his greatest teacher. He sat with a glass of whiskey in hand, staring at the calm night sky. He no longer felt anger toward Emma. She had made her choices, and she had paid the price for them. But he? He had emerged stronger, wiser, and unshakable. People think betrayal breaks you, but that's not true. It teaches you. It shows you who you are, what you can endure, and how strong you can become when the dust settles. Emma chose him over me, but in the end I chose myself, and that made all the difference. Daniel stood up, taking a deep breath, and looked out at the stars. A faint smile crossed his lips. The past was behind him. The future was his to own.